Goedemiddag. Hierbij open ik het gesprek van de vaste commissie voor Buitenlandse Zaken met 2 Palestijnse inwoners van Oost-Jeruzalem over huisuitzettingen. Dit gesprek wordt via een digitale verbinding gevoerd en zal in het Engels plaatsvinden. I will continue now in English. I welcome Mr. Zakaria Odeh, coordinator of the Civic Coalition for Palestinian Rights in Jerusalem, and Mohammed el-Kurd, native of Sheikh Jarrah, East Jerusalem. They wish to speak with the members of the Committee on Foreign Affairs on the forced eviction of their families and others from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah by Israeli settlers. I also welcome Madam Rawan Suleiman, head of the Palestinian Mission to the Netherlands. First, I will introduce the members of the committee attending this meeting so far. First of all, we have Mr. Ruben Brekelmans, member of the Liberal Party, the VVD. Then we have Mr. Segers, a member of the Christian Union. Then we have Ms. Agnes Mulder, member of the Christian Democratic Party. And we have Mr. Sjoerd Sjoerdsma, member of the D66 Liberal Party as well. My name is Jasper van Dijk, member of the Socialist Party and acting as a chair of this meeting. Mr. Odeh and Mr. el-Kurd, whom of you can I give you the floor as the first speaker?
Mohammed el-Kurd, please. Mohammed el-Kurd will speak first, please.
That's
Yes.
perfect. The floor is yours, Mr. el-Kurd.
And just to confirm, I have 10 minutes.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. I would like to speak to you about what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. To give you a little bit of a brief history, what's happening is all of our families in Sheikh Jarrah were thrown out of their homes in 1948 upon the establishment of Israel. We were forcibly expelled, many of us massacred, and we had to find refuge in other places. In 1956, the UNRWA, the UN, and the Jordanian government came together to build a refugee housing project in Sheikh Jarrah, which built 28 housing units for Palestinian families, one of which was my family. And in the 70s, in the early 70s, you started to have settler organizations that are registered in the United States that began claiming our lands as their own. So that's the situation. Ever since the 70s, we've had many attempts at stealing our homes by these settler organizations that are working in collaboration with the Israeli government. In 2009, we lost 4 homes, including half of mine. And we have been living in complete horror and complete anticipation of our forced displacement and ethnic cleansing. In the past year, we have established a campaign to save Sheikh Jarrah from these efforts at ethnic cleansing. And this campaign, which was essentially just protesters chanting for their freedom, for their dignity against the Israeli systemic policies of displacement, of forced ethnic displacement, these campaigns, these protests were met with absolutely brutal force. So for the past 3 months, we have been seeing an increase, an unprecedented level of force. I'll give you a few examples. For the past month, we have been going to sleep in our shoes because we don't know what time the Israeli settlers are going to come and burn our homes, like they say, or what time the Israeli occupation forces are going to invade our homes. In the past 2 weeks, our neighbors, many of our homes were invaded. We had rubber-coated bullets thrown inside of our homes, tear gas thrown inside of our homes, stun grenades thrown inside of our homes. In fact, in our next-door neighbor's case, Abu Ali Diab, he is 95 years old, and he has a tear gas canister thrown inside his living room. An hour later, his son, who was well into his 50s, had his leg broken by Israeli occupation forces. If you go up the street, you have Jenny Kiswani, a 15-year-old girl who had her spine fractured by an Israeli rubber-coated bullet that was shot on her spine inside her home. There's clear vengeance on the Israeli occupation forces' part, and they are doing everything they can to humiliate us, to harass us, to do everything they can to make our lives a living nightmare. For the past 23 days, our neighborhood has been under an illegal blockade. No Palestinians are allowed in, not even journalists, not even medics, nobody, no Palestinians allowed in. Even those of us who live in the neighborhood have a really hard time coming into the neighborhood, whereas Israeli settlers can just walk into the neighborhood, no questions asked. They can wield their guns, they can wield their rifles. This is complete collusion between the settlers and the state is offering these settlers emboldenment, protection, and they can just walk around with their weapons and rifles. Again, no questions asked. This has been a complete state of terror, of state-sanctioned terror for our young ones, for our elderly. My sister, among many children and teens in the neighborhood, have developed stress disorders and panic disorders that will haunt them until their last days. Our elderly should not be on the street. My father is almost 80 years old. He should not be on the street fighting this every single day of his life. I am in my early 20s and I should not be here today. I shouldn't be talking to diplomats and politicians to save my home, but I am, because that's what you have to do when you're facing billionaire-backed settler organizations working with a fascist government to take over your home. That is the truth. I ask on you today to implement sanctions against the Israeli government, follow the steps of other nations who have begun to do so, at least condemn this ethnic cleansing. You know, you'll have the Israeli government work really hard to convince you that this is a real estate dispute, this is an eviction order, but in fact it's none of that. What's happening here is that we have lived in these homes from decades and decades and decades, and you have Israeli settlers fabricating documents, and you have Israeli courts taking these documents for face value. To give you a little example, we have documents from the Ottoman archives, from Turkey, from the Jordanian government, from the United Nations, from many international law attorneys, and yet the Israeli judicial system refuses to look at these documents, because inherently that judicial system is one that is colonial, is one that is biased for settlers, that discriminates against Palestinians, that was built by and for Israeli settlers. So it's really important to reinforce the fact that this is not a real estate dispute. We are going against a system, against a judicial system that is working really hard to dispel us. Another example, and I'll conclude with this, another example of the settler state collusion is a city councilman named Yonatan Youssef. He's been coming to our neighborhood and vandalizing our murals with spray paint. Our murals literally just say, "Welcome to Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood." And he vandalized the protection of the police and calls them anti-Semitic. This is the same man that is responsible for rejecting or accepting Palestinian people's building permits in Jerusalem. And as you may know already, 94% of the building permits submitted by Palestinians to the Israeli authorities get rejected. I would like to remind you that under international law, Israel has no legal jurisdiction, no legitimacy over the eastern part of occupied Jerusalem. We should not even be going to the Israeli courts. And as the UN said, as 190 human rights organizations have said, as 190 law organizations have said, what is happening is a breach of international and humanitarian law. It is a violation of the Geneva Convention, of the Rome Statute, and it could amount to a war crime. Forcibly transferring a population of refugees when you're an occupying entity is indeed a war crime. So I ask you to hold yourself accountable to your professional standards and impose and protect humanitarian and international law. That is what the people of Sheikh Jarrah ask of you, because we are sick and tired of living under fear and Israeli state-sanctioned terror. I would like to stay in my home for as long as I can, because that is my right as a human being, but also that is my right as a Palestinian in a Palestinian city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. el-Kurd. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Zakaria Odeh.
Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank you for giving us this time in order to highlight one of the main issues, one of the main areas, really witnessing continuous human rights violations. In fact, Sheikh Jarrah case is one of the longest legal and political battle that has been going on for nearly 50 years. As Mohammed said, it has been going on since 1972. So why Sheikh Jarrah? Because it's important to mention that there is a plan to replace Sheikh Jarrah family and the homes to build a settlement of 250 housing units. Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood which located in the heart of East Jerusalem. It's part of the plan, the bigger plan, which the Israeli government, the Israeli municipality, they talk about. But they talk about the Holy Basin. They include the old city of Jerusalem, Silwan in the south, Mount of Olive in the east, and Sheikh Jarrah in the north. So this is part of the bigger Israeli settlement plan for the whole part of the area of Sheikh Jarrah. You know, it's very important to understand what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. It's very important to understand what's going on in Jerusalem as a whole. It's very important just to remind you that East Jerusalem is an occupied city and it's part of the occupied territories. Therefore, Geneva Convention, IHL, international human rights law are applicable. So any action by the Israeli government as an occupying forces according to international law is illegal. So all the policies which has been going on, I think you are aware that this month, it becomes a 54 years of Israeli occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. But what we have been witnessing, it's important to talk about that Israel has been targeting not only Sheikh Jarrah, they have been targeting several neighborhoods in Jerusalem. Silwan, it's one of the neighborhoods under attack by the Jewish Israeli settlement movement, by the municipality of Jerusalem. There are like 3 or 4 neighborhoods in the area of Silwan. It's one of the neighborhoods in the south of the old city that has been targeted and facing either home demolition or home evictions. So thousands of Palestinians who have been living there for even before the Israeli occupation. Some homes were built even before 1948, before the Israeli state, but they are facing a home demolition threat or home eviction. We have been seeing, it's important to mention that Israel, since they occupied East Jerusalem, they annexed East Jerusalem. What does that mean? That they put East Jerusalem under the Israeli jurisdiction, violating the basic human rights, violating the Geneva Convention, violating the human rights, the international law as well. So it's important to mention that Israel now are controlling nearly 87% of the land of occupied East Jerusalem, and they use it. So only 13% of the land of occupied East Jerusalem is only left for the use of the Palestinians, for buildings, for building homes and housing. And because of this shortage of land, as a result of the Israeli land confiscation policy and building settlement, this created a huge shortage of housing rights. In East Jerusalem, there are now nearly 230 Jewish settlers who are living in occupied East Jerusalem. And, to settle as an occupying power, to settle your people in occupied territories, it's a clear violation. Not only it's violation of Geneva Convention, but as well is violation of Rome Statute, which consider, settling your people as an occupying power in the occupied land as a war crime. This is very clear according to Rome Statute. So the other policy that Israel has been implementing, because of the shortage of land, it's very difficult as well for people to obtain a building permit for the Arab Palestinian. As Mohammed said, it's very complicated, it takes a long time, and it costs a lot of money. And it's very difficult to obtain these permits, so Palestinians have no option but to build without a permission. And what does that mean? That there is a daily, according to the Israeli law, if you build without the permits, so the home must be demolished. So the home demolition policy of the Israeli government, the municipality of Jerusalem, is a daily life for the Palestinian. But just let me mention that in 2020, in spite of the COVID and the health crisis that everybody, including Palestinians, are facing, we have witnessed a big increase and intensify of home demolition. In 2020, 170 structures were demolished, including 105 homes, displacing 391 persons, including 194 children. This is only what happened. This is only the demolition in 2020. So the other issue that you might be aware is the closure of Jerusalem. You know, Jerusalem since 2006 and 8, it has been closed completely by the separation wall, by military checkpoint, where as a result of the closure, they have been denying access to nearly 4 million Palestinians from Gaza Strip and from the rest of the West Bank to access to Jerusalem. You are all aware Jerusalem is one of the holy cities for both Christian and Muslims. But even there are a lot of restrictions and accessibility for the Christian during the Easter, for the Muslim as well during the feast. They have been really prevented or denied the right to reach Al-Aqsa Mosque and to practice their religious belief. All these policies, without annexation, building settlement, expansion of Israeli Jewish settlement, controlling the land, demolition homes, as well as revoking the residency of the Palestinians who are residents of East Jerusalem. Maybe you are aware, after 1967, the Israeli government considered Palestinians who have been living in occupied East Jerusalem as residents. So there are many ways that the Israeli Ministry of Interior, that they revoke the Palestinian residency. Today, nearly 15,660 people who already lost their residency in East Jerusalem. So all these really policies, all the above policy which we have been really talking about in East Jerusalem, has always one main goal. It's part of what we call it, they call it the demographic strategy of the Israeli institution and Israeli government, which always talks about how to create a Jewish Israeli majority in all the city of Jerusalem, vis-a-vis a small minority of Palestinian Arabs in the city of Jerusalem. That's why this forced displacement policy, population transfer that has been going on, not only from 1967, but even since 1948. You know, Palestinians in Jerusalem, they have been going through these policies, which is a clear violation of Geneva Convention, of the international humanitarian law and international human right, which I am sure you are all aware of this. Just to conclude, Palestinians, Jerusalemites, live an exceptionally harsh reality in which fundamental rights are attacked on a daily basis.
Thank
Despite Israeli claim that East Jerusalem, but despite the Israeli claims, East Jerusalem remain occupied and governed therefore by the law of armed conflict and by the international law. Therefore, we call upon your government, we call upon the Dutch government to hold Israel accountable for its action, for its continuous and systematic violations, crimes, some of them could reach crimes, war crimes against the Palestinian people. It's very important that the international community will take an action to stop all these violations and all these crimes against the Palestinian people in occupied East Jerusalem. The last call, really, I would like to call upon the Dutch government to acknowledge, to recognize the Palestinian state, which has been recognized by tens of international states and states to recognize it, because by recognizing the Palestinian state, really you are supporting justice in the area. And, you know, it's very important to know there will be no peace in the area, whether in Palestine and Israel, or in the whole region, unless peace will be achieved and the Palestinian rights for self-determination will be achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zakaria. We have 35 minutes left for 7 members of parliament to ask some questions. And Ms. Suleiman, I'd like to ask you, do you want to add a short statement, or do you would like to listen to the questions?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank the respected members of the committee for meeting with Mohammed, el-Kurd and Zakaria. We have been in touch with you and your colleagues on the topic for several weeks now. For us, it is extremely important that you hear from the people themselves, directly from Jerusalem, and thank you for making this opportunity to make their voices heard here in the city of peace and justice and in the capital of international law. Looking forward for the answers, and what has been said by Mohammed and Zakaria represents us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Suleiman. We have 7 members. 2 other members are here as well. Mr. van der Lee from the Green Left Party and Mr. Kuzu from the Denk or Think Party. I want to ask you to write the questions down, because I'm going to give the floor to 3 members and then answer them, and then give the other 4 members the floor. First, Mr. Brekelmans from the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Zakaria, and also Mr. el-Kurd, for taking the time to have this conversation with us and to share your personal experiences and also your views on everything that's happening. You touched on many big topics and important points: the history of everything that happened, settlement policies, international law. But we only have half an hour left, and we could have a long discussion about this, but I just want to focus on one particular question that you haven't touched upon that much. And that's what the reason for this legal procedure, and I think that was the question of whether rent should be paid. And I know that until 1993 rents have been paid, but afterwards that hasn't been the case. And I was wondering if you can shed some more light on that and what the reason has been for not paying these rents.
And your question is to Mr. el-Kurd?
To el-Kurd or Mr. Zakaria.
Sorry, Mr. el-Kurd. Wait. First, we do 2 other members because we don't have so much time. Mr. Segers, what's your question? Please write the questions down.
Good afternoon, and thank you for sharing your stories with us. I'm sorry to hear about suffering and fear. I don't want anyone to live in fear and this kind of circumstance, so we all hope with you for a peaceful solution for all the cases that are on the table now. And I have a historical question. Before 48, I don't think there was an East Jerusalem or West Jerusalem, it was just Jerusalem. And there were also Jewish citizens living in the eastern part of Jerusalem. So after the 48 war, there was a separation, and now we are still living in these difficult circumstances, and also legal. You have a lot of legal issues. But from your point of view, is there also, I mean, are there also Jews with the right to live in East Jerusalem, and are there old rights before 48 that are still valid? Is that your view? I mean, what is your view on a multi-ethnic and maybe multinational city of Jerusalem in both East and West?
Your question was to?
Maybe Mr. Zakaria can answer.
Okay, then Ms. Mulder, please, your question.
Thank you very much. It's good to have this dialogue today. It's important to hear from the people themselves from Jerusalem. So thank you very much for sharing your views. And our party supports fully the way our government views this case, and I want to state it once again today. And as you said, the settlements are not in line with international law, but that might not be the same as that you consider it being a war crime. So how do you all view this? Because in line and a war crime, there's a difference, and I would like to hear from the Palestinian representation in the Netherlands how they view this.
Thank you. Mr. el-Kurd, would you like to start answering the questions?
Yeah, I'm sorely interested to know where the liberal member of parliament got the information that we've paid rent up until 1993. I believe that as a member of government, you should know your information, and your information should be correct. And what you just did was spill this information. We have never paid $1 to any entity whatsoever. When you pay rent to someone, in case you didn't know, you need to have a landlord. We here in Sheikh Jarrah have never had a landlord. These homes were built for us by the Jordanian government. The issue was that you have Israeli settlers presenting documents to Israeli courts claiming Israeli ownership. The asymmetry here is that the Israeli courts will never and have never looked at the documents that we presented. I utterly reject the notion that we are supposed to pay rent to a non-existent landlord, and I am ashamed to be asked such an ignorant question that clearly has no education whatsoever on the matter. I urge you to take a minute to read on the matter before you ask such ignorant questions. Thank you.
Were that all the questions, Mr. el-Kurd, also from the other members? In that case, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Zakaria.
Thank you. In fact, with regard, just to make a comment with regard to the first question, as Mohammed said, that there, the creation or the start of the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah was by an initiative between the Jordanian government and UNRWA. Jordan provided the land, and UNRWA, they sponsor or built 28 homes for 28 refugee families who were displaced in 1948. And then the families were living there, and after 3 years, Jordan was supposed to register the land and the homes in the name of the families. But due to the war of 1967, Jordan couldn't do that. So families were living there until 1972. In 1972, two Israeli settler groups, they start claiming that they own the land from 1885. And then the legal and political battle started. The Israeli settler group, they managed to get or to have some kind of registration with the Israeli Land Registration Office based on illegal or false claim that they own the land. And the case has been for 49 years. It's 50 years. I mean, can you imagine if they really own the land? that the people have been till now living there, that they haven't managed to evict them. And, you know, because even the lawyers of the families, they went to Ankara, to Turkey, to examine the archive. You know, the archive for land ownership in Jerusalem or in all Palestine is in Ankara. And there they found that there is no original document of the claim or the document that the settler have. As well, that they did that with Jordan. But you know what happened with regard what exactly you talk about the rent. In 1989, the family, they had an Israeli Jewish lawyer at that time. So this Israeli Jewish lawyer, he made an agreement with the lawyer of this Israeli settler group where he accepted that the settlers are the owner of the land and the families are a protected tenant. He did this agreement without even consulting the families. No one from the families, they knew about this Israeli Jewish lawyer, what he done. And this became like the legal basis for all the eviction after that. Yani as Mohammed said, nobody ever claimed that the rent, nobody ever asked them for the rent, because even there were 2 or 3 decisions at the district court and one at the high court where they said that they told the Israeli settler group, go to the district court and solve the problem of the ownership of the land. So till now, I mean, there has been no proof, no really proof that the settlers, they own the land. With regard to question number 2, you know, before 1948, there were some Jewish people who were living in East Jerusalem, in all Jerusalem. You know, they were Jewish Palestinians because there was no Israeli state at that time. So they were Jewish Palestinians like Israel, like Christian, like Muslim. So after Israel was established in 1948, most of the Jews who were living in East Jerusalem, they moved and lived either in West Jerusalem or in other part of what became later as Israel. So this continued until 1967 when Israel occupied East Jerusalem, part of occupying the West Bank. Then in 1970, the Israeli government or the Knesset, they passed a law where they said that Jewish Israelis who were living in East Jerusalem, they had the right to claim their ownership if they own the land. You know, this is a very clear discriminatory law. You know, most Palestinians and even these families in Sheikh Jarrah, they were displaced in 1948. They have homes in Jaffa, Haifa, in West Jerusalem, in all parts of historic Palestine, what became Israel. So the Palestinians have no right to claim their rights. I mean, some of the family, they have 2 homes in Jaffa or West Jerusalem. But for Palestinians, look how the discrimination in the Israeli laws, they have no right to claim their ownership, which is before they became refugees. As I said, after 67, Israel started building settlement. There are now 230 Jewish settlers. There are nearly 45 of the population of occupied East Jerusalem are Israeli Jewish settlers, and the expansion of settlement is going on. You know, during 2020, 4 settlement projects were approved by the Israeli government. They are surrounding the city of Jerusalem from the south, from the east, and from the north, and they are trying to separate the city of Jerusalem from the rest of occupied West Bank, from its extension in the south and in the east and in the north. You know, I think it's very clear with regard to settlers to be settled in occupied territory. It's a clear violation of Geneva Convention. It's a clear violation of international law, and it's according to Rome Statute. settlers to live, to be settled in occupied territories by the occupying government, occupying power, is a war crime, or it could reach a crime against humanity. This is, I think, clear in Rome Statute. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Suleiman.
Well, thank you very much for asking this this question. You know, as I represent the Palestine to the Netherlands, I also represent Palestine to the ICC. State of Palestine is a state party to the ICC. We joined it in 2015, and settlement file was one of the important files that we submitted to the ICC prosecutor. Settlement is illegal under international law, and what makes it considered as a war crime is also the continuous commission of the crime. Also, the transfer of the population into the occupied territory. And that's what happened, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan and other areas in Palestine. So, yes, settlements constitute a crime under the Rome Statute, under Article 8/2b8. It is a claim that it is continuous in nature, so long as the civilian population of the occupying power remains in the occupied territory. Of course, it is important to note that the settlement regime is also comprises of other policies and practices that constitute crime under the statute. Including persecution, apartheid, to name a few, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. van der Lee from the Green Left Party.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much for what you've told us about the perverted occupation policy of Israel. I think you're completely right in terms of the legal situation. It's very clear. And I'm also very sorry to hear the impact it has on the elderly, the children, and on yourself living there. My party advocates for sanctions, for instance, the suspension of the association treaty with Israel. But my questions are two political questions. The situation in Israel, Jerusalem, has been a trigger for a lot of recent violence, a short war, I would say. And we see that simultaneously there is a political crisis in Israel in terms of forming a next government. And I would like to know what you suspect are the implications of these two occurrences on the situation in Israel, Jerusalem. Do you think decisions will be postponed? Do you expect that the Israeli new government, whichever it will be, will enforce the eviction? Could you tell us a bit about your expectations?
Thank you. Mr. Schuurtsma.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to share with us your personal stories and your stories related to the history of the area. I had the pleasure of living in Sheikh Jarrah myself in 2011-2012. So I know a little bit about the daily situation you talk about. I would appreciate, however, if you could elaborate a little bit more on the day-to-day practices on allowing settlers to move in, to walk in, and keeping Palestinians out of their neighborhood, and the consequences that has for your daily life. Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask a question myself now as a member of the Socialist Party. Thank you, all three of you, for your stories. And Mr. el-Kurd, it's a very sound and clear message you give us. I would like to ask you what kind of sanctions would be you're thinking of, for instance, coming from the European Union, And I also had this question, do you have any hopeful expectations from this possible new government that's coming from Israel, or do you think it's going to change nothing at all? I would like to give the floor to Mr. el-Kurd to begin with. Your sound, your microphone, please.
Thank you. I'll answer the questions, but I wanted to just, I forgot to answer an earlier question that was posed about a multinational city, a multi-ethnic city. And I'll just say that I think, quite honestly, I think it's pretty racist to ask me this question, given the fact that Palestinians are not the ones who are going into Jewish neighborhoods and throwing tear gas into 95-year-old people's homes. We are not the ones going into people's homes and shooting them with rubber-coated bullets in their spines and causing them to be paralyzed. We are not the ones working on a systemic level to expel the Palestinian population, the Jewish population. That is not what's happening. So when you ask me about a multi-ethnic city, as if I have the power to even consider it, it's a red herring. It's a distraction from what is going on the ground, that there's a systemic policy of forced ethnic displacement that is taking place against me and my people and the Palestinians. So please be reminded of this and be reminded of the power dynamics when you dare ask a question about a multinational, multi-ethnic Jerusalem city, as if Palestinians have anything to do with the violence taking place against them. We are not the ones going into Jewish neighborhoods and stabbing Jews. We are not the ones going into Jewish neighborhoods and chanting death to Jews. We're not doing any of that. They're the ones who are coming into our neighborhoods with their guns, with their rifles, with their bags of stones, with their knives, with their gas, and chanting death to Arabs. Do not ask me about coexistence when I have zero power deciding if I can coexist or not. Now, to use that to elaborate on the point of the daily practices. What's happening is we have 4 entrances to the neighborhood, all of which have cement barriers around them, and all of these cement barriers serve as a stop, as a checkpoint for us Palestinians. So today, when I walked into the neighborhood this morning, I had to show the police officer my ID. He called me by my name because they know us. He said, Mohammed el-Kurd, come show me your ID, as if he doesn't know I live there. I showed him my ID. My ID said Sheikh Jarrah, but it didn't say the exact name of the street that I live on. So he investigated me for 5 minutes, and then he started screaming at me, no reason whatsoever, and then he shoved me around. And I want to say that this is not an anomaly. This is not a unique situation. They have a vendetta against us, and they're doing everything they can to make our lives a living hell, because we will manage to enter and escape the gatekeeping of people like diplomats and politicians and mainstream journalists, and we were able to show the truth for what it is. Meanwhile, Israeli settlers, and we have video proof of this, we have pictures of this, Israeli settlers can just walk in, no questions asked. Most of them, if not all of them, have their rifles on their belts and can just walk in, no questions asked. This morning, yesterday, a week ago, we are constantly hearing more and more threats from Israeli settlers about wanting to burn our homes, about wanting to take over our homes and massacre us, and they do this with the Israeli officers present. In contrast, we tried to fly a kite in our neighborhood the other day, and the people who flew the kite got assaulted and arrested. 2 Palestinian journalists were standing taking videos of the settlers with the guns, and both of them were assaulted and arrested for 5 days. There's a clear policy of apartheid here that we have documented to a T, and we have exquisite proof of it. In terms of sanctions, I think boycotting Israeli products is a good start. I think expelling the ambassador and expelling any kind of diplomatic, economic, political relationships with Israel is a good start. To remind you of what's happening here, we are facing a systematic, calculated governmental push to dispel and displace all of us who are Palestinian from our cities. Many of us in the Gaza Strip have gotten carpet bombed under the excuse that there's a terrorist group in the Gaza Strip, which is, not to say the least, a red herring. This is not about anything but about how much you care about Palestinian life. And your government, for the longest time, have proved time and time again that you do not care about Palestinians. This is proven by some of the questions that I got asked today, some of the racist, insensitive questions that you have asked me today. But this is also proven by the lack of action on your government's behalf. So those of you who are enthusiastic, those of you who are sympathetic, I thank you. And I hold your hand, and I really thank you. And I urge you to push for sanctions, because we are pushing your people, the people of that country, to protest and put pressure on you. So this is not going to be the last time you're going to hear about Palestinian human rights and Palestinians' right to liberation. But it's up to you to take a stance and care about Palestinian rights. It's up to you to see what's happening on the ground for what it is and stop being racist and take a stand to support Palestinians.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zakaria.
Yes, with regard to the first question with the political situation and this political development within the Israeli, I think you know now the talk about that might be a new government between Bennett's. You know, I think you are all aware Bennett is really more even radical, more right-wing. I think he's more right-wing even than Netanyahu. And he is a settler. He was always calling for expansion of settlement, for building settlement. He always in support of all these actions, all these policies, and occupied Jerusalem against the Palestinians. So with regard what expected, you know now the situation now that the High Court, the case in the High Court is waiting for a legal opinion of the Israeli General Attorney, where he has till the 8th of June, he has to give his opinion about all the legal issue or the legal process of the case of Sheikh Jarrah, where I think why all this has been going on, because, you know, there has been a lot of protests, there has been movements in the ground in Sheikh Jarrah, in all the neighborhood of Jerusalem. It was spread, expanded to all the cities of the West Bank, even to all the cities, Palestinian cities. Within 1948, there have been a lot of protests, there have been a lot of action against the Israeli policy, the Israeli forced displacement of Sheikh Jarrah. Because of that, we expect that they will try to use the time to calm the situation, because they don't want to see a new intifada, a new uprising. But we hope that there will be some kind of result that the Israeli General Attorney, although we know that the law is an Israeli law, the law is the annexation law, the judges are Israelis, the prosecutor is Israelis, but at least, you know, when we go as Palestinian to the Israeli legal system, through our experience, really, we don't go because we believe that justice will be realized. No, because it's a path that we have to go through in order to try to stop or restrict the Israeli policies, the Israeli plan, the Israeli action, and as well to use it in our advocacy work with the international community. The other question with regard to the settler movement, you know, as Mohammed said, it's very clear how they discriminate in dealing with the different people at the checkpoint. You know, they first established the metal barriers, that was 3 weeks ago or more. Then they enforce it with a concrete barriers as well. They closed all the area. They don't allow anybody from outside, even, you know, the sons and the daughters of the family, if they are married and they live in other neighborhoods different than Sheikh Jarrah. And of course, always your address is registered in your ID card. So when they show the checkpoint, the police at the checkpoint, they refuse to access them because in their ID is written another neighborhood. Although they are the sons and the daughters of the families who are living in the neighborhood. While, as Mohammed said, settlers all the time, they have access easily, even they don't check them, even they don't ask them about their ID card. I mean, you know, Sheikh Jarrah now, it's like a big prison, you know, with all this harassment, with all this suppression by the police, storming the houses, arresting and detention of the young people, many individuals in the neighborhood. You know what they use? One of the punishment after they are arrested, the judge give his or her ruling that the person should be deported from the neighborhood for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. I mean, what's more really harsh than these kind of policies that the Israeli government institutions are really implementing, and all this discrimination? I think with regard what you do, your role is very important. We are really as Palestinians very angry because of your position at the Human Rights Council with regard to establishing the Commission of Inquiry. And I can't imagine that there are states like Netherlands, Germany, and other states who consider and claim to be a democratic state, and they are supporting the justice and human rights globally. And they vote against establishing a commission to make inquiry about the Israeli violation and the Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people. So your role is very important. Your voice is very important. You know, because as we said, in order, you are not taking side. We are not asking you to take the side of the Palestinians. We are asking you to take the side of justice, the side of the human rights of the people under occupation, who were supposed to be a protected person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zakaria. Finally, I will give the floor to Ms. Suleiman for the last few minutes you have to finish the meeting.
Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for Mohammed and Zakaria for speaking out loudly, and thank you for listening as well. Yes, this is a very important opportunity to meet, because we believe that the role of Parliament is extremely important when questioning also governments and what are the government's position in certain area. Yes, we were disappointed by the vote of the Netherlands in Human Rights Council. They abstained on an establishment of an ongoing inquiry mission to investigate what happened without mentioning any side. So we really don't understand this position. On the other hand, the vote on the WHO asking Israel to comply with its obligation under the Geneva Convention, especially in this hard time for the world during the pandemic. You can do a lot because I insist that this is a very important country that can play a very important role. You are the capital of international law, and you are the seat of the International Criminal Court. The court, people should be persecuted for what they are doing and should be held accountable. The least we can do is, yes, to do and to take an action and not to stay silent on what's going on in my country, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and everywhere in Palestine. You follow a policy that is called discouragement policy. This is an important step in the right direction, but unfortunately is incomplete and not enough. You need to upgrade this because through updating and upgrading it, you are sending a message to Israel, the occupying power, that this is a situation that cannot continue, and that it is not and should not be the destiny of the Palestinian people to live under the occupation for the rest of their lives. Palestinians are entitled with freedom and justice. Our struggle is for freedom and justice and equality. Please upgrade your policy and ban all settlement products. Do not deal with settlement enterprise. Investment in settlements are illegal. Human Rights Council is very clear in all its resolutions regarding this. You have a responsibility, and responsibility needs action, and we expect that members of the parliament to take actions in this regard. Thank you very much again for this meeting, and we look forward to more and more meetings. Thank you again, Zakaria and Mohammed, speaking directly from Sheikh Jarrah. This is extremely important to make your voice and the voice of our people heard in this very important country.
Thank you very much, all three of you, for your very clear message. I can assure you as a chair that the subject is definitely on the table in the Netherlands. And please do not hesitate to approach us whenever you have something to say by mail or in any other way. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the members of the parliament, and I close this meeting by now. Thank you.
Thank you for them.